Six Flags. New Orleans hasn't sold a single ticket in over 20 years. Roller coasters sat frozen under floodwater for a month straight. A $130 million theme park just disappeared into swamp grass, and Hurricane Katrina gets all the blame. But the real story starts 15 years earlier with a park that was broken before it ever opened. Go back to 1983. New Orleans loses Pontchartrain Beach, its only real amusement park. After that, the nearest big theme park is Astroworld in Houston, 350 miles away. That gap is where the dream started. Local developers Tom and Dean Weininger owned swampland in New Orleans East, and they had an idea, a theme park that actually celebrated the city. Jazz. Cajun culture, Mardi Gras. Not a generic park with a New Orleans gift shop, it made sense on paper. There was a hole in the market, available land, a city hungry for its park back. The problem was money. The Weiningers spent almost a decade chasing financing, and the project earned a nickname during those years, the project that would never be. Here's the first crack, and it's a big one. When the money finally came together, it wasn't a normal business deal. The Department of Housing and Urban Development loaned $15 million in 1995, then another loan in 1998, bringing the public total past $25 million. The state kicked in a $10 million grant. A private bank only put up $30 million. Taxpayers had more skin in the game than the bank did. A local watchdog group called that unusual at the time. Years later, a newspaper editorial board called the whole arrangement one of the most wasteful uses of government money in the state's history. So before a single ride was built, the foundation was shaky, financially and literally. The land was swamp. Crews poured a concrete deck 4 feet thick just to keep the park above the waterline. They were building a fantasy on top of a problem they never solved. They just built a floor over it. Construction started in 1998 under Ogden Corporation. Then, 2 months before opening, Ogden sold its entire theme park division to a Greek company for $148 million. The new operator, Alpha Smart Parks, specialized in water parks and small arcades, not big destination parks. The company about to run a brand new Louisiana theme park had never really run one before. None of that stopped opening day. On May 20th, 2000, Jazzland opened to a crowd of 20,000 to 25,000, with up to 80,000 season passes already sold. 6 themed lands, 30 rides, headlined by a wooden coaster called the Mega Zeph, named after the old Zephyr from Pontchartrain Beach. For one summer, New Orleans had its park back. Then year 2 hit, and attendance nearly cut in half, down to around 560,000. Why? Louisiana summers are brutal, and Jazzland had almost no shade and almost no water rides. The operator that specialized in water parks had somehow built a park without one. Combine that with roughly $80 million in existing debt, and the math stopped working. In February 2002, Alpha filed for bankruptcy. Because HUD had loaned public money on the promise of local benefit, the city of New Orleans got stuck covering the loan. The park wasn't even 2 years old, and taxpayers were already absorbing its losses. Six Flags stepped in, and for a while, it looked like a real rescue. They acquired the park out of bankruptcy in 2002, signed a 75-year lease, and poured in real money, over $20 million up front, climbing toward $40 million. New coasters, a Batman-themed area, shade structures finally. The park reopened April 12, 2003, as Six Flags New Orleans. And this is where it actually became something people loved. School groups came through constantly. Rival high schools held dance competitions there. Fright Fest became a tradition. A local meteorologist who grew up nearby later called it one of the biggest family attractions in the city, with the Mega Zeph as her favorite ride. This wasn't a struggling business limping along, it was a real piece of childhood for a lot of families. But underneath the success, the same weaknesses kept getting worse. Revenue fell every single year, $24.5 million in 2003, $18.1 million in 2004, just $15 million in 2005. Six Flags' own SEC filings later admitted the marketplace simply never embraced the park, an assessment that covers the years before anything went wrong with the weather. This was one of the least profitable parks in the entire company. And there was a second problem, baked directly into the land. The park sat in a low-lying flood zone, less than 1.5 miles from Lake Pontchartrain, ringed by a 6-foot earthen berm that created something like an artificial bowl. The only thing keeping that bowl dry was drainage pumps running constantly. Nobody thought twice about it, as long as the pumps worked. There was also a tragedy that summer no one could have predicted. On July 9, 2003, 52-year-old Rosa Donaldson was killed on a ride called Joker's Jukebox while strapping her 4-year-old grandson into a seat. The ride's spinning cars struck her. Six Flags said it wasn't clear why she'd been in the ride area and called it a tragic accident. Investigators ruled out mechanical failure. The ride reopened 5 days later with added safety measures. Even at a place full of joy and nostalgia, the danger was real, and the loss was permanent for one family. By the summer of 2005, Six Flags had sunk roughly $40 million into the park and was about to announce a long-promised water park for the following year, the one thing that might have finally fixed the attendance problem. They never got the chance. The park's last operating day was August 21, 2005. Katrina made landfall on the 29th, eventually killing around 1,400 people directly and flooding over 80% of the city. At the park, the disaster came down to that berm. Floodwater from the lake overwhelmed the drainage pumps. The pumps failed, and the berm that had protected the park for years now trapped the water inside instead of letting it drain. Depth estimates vary, somewhere between 4 and 7 feet, and some reports say deeper, but the water sat there for over a month. A full month of salt water soaking into wood, steel, and concrete. When engineers finally got in, they found roughly 80% of the buildings and rides destroyed. The Megazeph was ruled beyond repair. Almost everything was gone. Almost everything. Batman, the ride, elevated and built from corrosion-resistant materials, survived mostly intact. One ride out of dozens. For a while, it looked like New Orleans might get its park back anyway. In July 2006, Six Flags declared it an effective total loss and said they had no intention of rebuilding. They wanted out of the lease they had signed 4 years earlier. Mayor Ray Nagin vowed to hold them to it. That fight never really mattered because the real battle was between Six Flags and its insurers, and it went badly. Six Flags claimed $150 million in total losses, but their policies contained flood sublimits, clauses that cap flood-specific payouts regardless of total damage. Courts largely sided with the insurers. Six Flags had built its entire recovery plan around money that was never going to arrive at the size they needed. The plan sounded solid. Almost none of it held up. With that money not coming, Six Flags spent the next few years stripping the site and shipping surviving rides elsewhere. Batman went to a Six Flags park in Texas, rebranded as Goliath. Other coasters went to New York and California. By September 2009, the city formally terminated the lease. Six Flags paid $3 million and walked away, folding it into their own bankruptcy that same year. The city got the land back, flooded, gutted, and still owing over $15 million on the original HUD loans. That's when the real cycle of false hope began, and it repeated for over a decade. In 2008, Southern Star Amusement proposed a 60-plus ride expansion called Legend City. It collapsed within months. A scaled-back version returned in 2009 and fell apart too. Then, in August 2009, Nagin announced a partnership with Nickelodeon for a branded park on the same land. By November, Nickelodeon had pulled out, citing missed deadlines. In 2012, the city approved a 400,000 square foot outlet mall on the site. That deal died within a year, undercut by a competing project elsewhere in the city. A company called Paideia tried 3 separate times, in 2011, 2014, and 2017, to reopen it under the original Jazzland name. Every bid went nowhere. And in 2016, a $100 million revival called Dream Landing Festival Park died 2 years later after an inspection concluded the surviving structures were not worth saving anymore, only worth tearing down. Roughly a dozen rescue plans over 15 years, and every single one collapsed before a brick got laid. The park was not just abandoned, it became a place where hope kept showing up and quietly leaving again. While all of that failed on paper, something stranger happened on the ground. The abandoned park became famous. Not for what it used to be, but for what it had turned into. Urban explorers traveled from around the world to photograph rusted coaster tracks and drained pools reclaimed by alligators and wild boar. The city eventually sent police to arrest trespassers. Hollywood noticed too. The ruins showed up in Percy Jackson, Sea of Monsters, and Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, and the parking lot became a film set for Jurassic World and Deepwater Horizon. A crumbling failure had become one of the most photographed abandoned places in America. The identity of the place had completely flipped. It stopped being a theme park that failed. It became a landmark for failure itself. That started to change in October 2021 when the city named a new developer, Bayou Phoenix, led by Troy Henry, for the 227-acre site. Even this deal nearly didn't happen. By 2022, it was described locally as being on life support. It took until October 2023 to actually sign a lease, with the land shifting to the city's redevelopment authority under a 50-year agreement. The new plan promised a sports complex, a water park, 2 hotels, a movie studio, and an artificial lake, priced around $500 million. Demolition finally began in November 2024. Crews tore down old rides one by one. Then, fittingly, the demolition itself got interrupted, a stop work order within the first week, because the contractor lacked the right state licensing. Work resumed in December under a new contractor, but not before a dispute broke out over who owned the scrap metal from 90 old rides and buildings. A park that never turned a real profit standing up was now generating disputes over its scrap value lying down. Through early 2025, the rest came down, including the Mega Zeph, the wooden coaster named after New Orleans' original Lost Ride. By March 2026, local news reported the site had officially been cleared. 20 years after Katrina, this wasn't a rebuild. It was the last of the original park finally being hauled away. Even now, the future isn't settled. As of early 2026, the developer admitted the project still needed tens of millions in public funding it hadn't secured, on top of roughly $300 million already lined up privately. The city's redevelopment authority has accused the developer of missing milestones and set a deadline to prove the project is still viable. The film studio is targeted for 2027. The sports complex, maybe 2028, maybe. So the story the title asked about isn't really a hurricane story. Six Flags New Orleans was built on borrowed money and swampland, run by a company that didn't understand what it was operating, protected by a berm and pumps that turned into a trap the moment they failed, and left in limbo by insurance clauses nobody outside a courtroom ever thinks about. Katrina was the ending. It was never really the cause. What's left today is mostly empty land. The buildings are gone. The coasters are scrapped or running under different names in other states, for people who have no idea where they came from. The concrete deck built decades ago to hold the swamp back is likely still down there somewhere, buried under whatever gets built next. The one part of the original construction nobody ever had to tear apart because it was never really the problem in the first place. For 20 years, this was the place people didn't talk about unless they used to go there as kids. Then it became the place explorers snuck into with cameras. Now it's just flat, cleared ground, waiting to see if this time something actually gets finished.